Hello, I'm Jim Rohn, and today we're going to explore a psychological mystery that will make you think. Why do people who once avoided you, who disappeared from your life without a word, suddenly come back and seem addicted to you after a period of no contact? Have you ever wondered what's going on in their mind? Are you silently struggling with feelings of confusion, hurt, or even a flicker of hope when they unexpectedly reappear? This isn't just a story about a strange comeback, but a deep journey into the human mind, the hidden motives, fears, and longings they never admit. In this video, I will decode this phenomenon with practical psychological insights, helping you not only understand why they come back, but also how to manage your own emotions in this drama-filled situation. Don't miss out, because by the end of the video, I'll reveal a surprising truth that could completely change the way you see them and yourself. If you want to explore more psychological secrets like this, hit subscribe now so you don't miss a single video. Get ready, because we're about to embark on a journey full of surprises. There is a strange aspect in how avoidant individuals perceive relationships that's hard to recognize at first. They appear cold to closeness, always pulling back when things get deep, and seem to place personal freedom above all else. When they create distance, you might think they've moved on without a second thought. But the truth isn't so simple. Though they fear intimacy, avoidants are also haunted by the fear of abandonment. This inner tug-of-war traps them in a whirlpool of emotions. Once no contact begins, deep down they carry a belief that closeness is a risk, that opening up leads to pain. Perhaps since childhood they've experienced moments where trust led to disappointment, prompting them to build walls and convince themselves they don't need anyone, that living alone is best. Until reality proves otherwise. When you were around, even without demanding much, your presence still made them feel threatened. For them, autonomy is the most valuable thing, and you unintentionally challenge that. But when you completely leave, everything flips. They no longer hold control, the very thing they rely on to keep things in check. You disappear, not temporarily or on their terms, but for good. That's when the fear of abandonment hits, suddenly and powerfully. They once thought pushing you away would bring safety, but when the distance becomes permanent, they panic. The truth is, they crave connection, even if they constantly deny it. They didn't accidentally get into a relationship with you. Something drew them in, but the fear of intimacy led them to destroy it with their own hands. This cycle is painfully ironic. They avoid closeness to feel free, but depend on the idea that you'll always wait for their return. They think they're in control, but once contact is cut, everything collapses. For the first time, they must face the consequences. Pushing you away might be forever. And that terrifies them, because it exposes a truth they've always run from, that avoidance doesn't protect them, it only causes them to lose what they truly need. As time passes, loneliness slowly turns into an irresistible obsession. The more they try to convince themselves they don't care, the clearer your image becomes in their mind. The more they want to forget, the more the emptiness clings to them. Though they don't want to admit it, and even they don't fully understand it, the void you left begins to eat away at them, bit by bit. And the longer it goes on, the stronger the pull becomes, like an invisible force they can't resist. So why does the avoidant get drawn back to you after no contact? Because that silence forces them to face their deepest fear. It shatters the shell of control they've clung to, exposing a truth they've avoided, that connection and love aren't enemies of freedom. They're what nourish their soul. But the bigger question remains, do they come back because they've truly changed, or just to fill the emptiness they can no longer bear? If you understand how avoidants operate, you'll see that their return isn't necessarily a sign of growth. Sometimes it's just how they deal with the consequences they created themselves. And that difference is the key. The decision is now in your hands. Will you open the door for them, knowing that everything might repeat as before? Or will you choose to believe that your absence has taught them something deeper? That a real relationship cannot survive without commitment, without effort, and above all, without the willingness to be present. If they cannot do that, then their return is not about you, but about their fear of losing what they've been running from all along. Human nature is always drawn to what is rare. The harder it is to grasp, the more alluring it becomes. This is true not only with money or fame, but also with the bonds between people. Even avoidant individuals who keep their distance from closeness are not exempt from this rule. When you were still there, ready and present, they took your existence for granted, not out of carelessness, but because the way they were shaped made them undervalue intimacy. To them, closeness was a burden, something to be avoided. But when you disappeared completely, when you cut all ties, something magical happened. The scarcity mindset kicked in. They began to crave what they realized they were losing, and that's what pulled them back, even though they once tried to push you away. This phenomenon is not unfamiliar in life, from economics to the art of negotiation. When something becomes scarce, it immediately sparks desire. A limited-time product creates urgency. A missed opportunity causes regret. It's the same in relationships. When someone who used to be close suddenly becomes distant, the mind starts to see them in a new light, questioning their true value. For avoidants, this is even more apparent. They don't necessarily hate connection, they just fear the cost of it. They tell themselves they prefer solitude, that distance is safer than vulnerability. But when there is no contact, everything changes. You are no longer something they can easily grasp or control. Your complete disappearance confuses them, and what was once seen as a burden now becomes a heavy void. The interesting part is, they don't miss you in a simple or clear way like others do. For the avoidant attachment style, everything is much more complicated. They're not used to admitting they need someone. Instead of facing their longing, they weave questions to mask their true feelings. They wonder what you're doing, where you are, who you're seeing, not because they're ready to admit their desire, but because they no longer have control over you. Before, they pushed you away to keep everything within reach, but now, with you becoming an unknown, they feel both confused and drawn in. This reversal isn't necessarily about love in the traditional sense, but about power. When they realize they no longer hold the upper hand in the relationship, the very thing they once tried to numb, their attachment system suddenly reactivates with intensity. Your absence is not just an empty space, but a blow to their belief system. What they once took lightly now becomes something they can't stop thinking about. They begin to ask, why is something that was once so easy to have now so far out of reach? And instead of feeling relief from escaping closeness, they're weighed down by the sense of loss. It's this loss of control that draws them to you, not because they're ready to change, but because human instinct always chases what it can't hold on to. For the avoidant, this becomes a gripping psychological game. They haven't just lost you, they've lost the power to shape the relationship on their own terms. And that to them is both terrifying and irresistible. Avoidants often come back unexpectedly, as if out of nowhere, but not because they've truly transformed. Instead, it's the feeling of loss that awakens them, making them look back at what was once taken for granted. Their mind, which always avoided attachment, is now drawn into the very thing it once feared. But the bigger question is this newfound attention a sign they are truly ready to open up? Or just a reaction to the emptiness they can't bear? Because once you come closer, once the fear of losing you fades, they may return to their old ways. What pulled them in during the distance can also push them away when you're present. Understanding the psychology of scarcity is key. It reveals that their obsession is not necessarily progress, but an echo of fear and inner conflict. The issue isn't whether they come back, but whether they've changed enough to stay. If they're only drawn back because you become hard to reach, then when things get easy again, the desire may fade. This cycle only ends when you realize that your worth does not depend on someone else's fear of losing you. The avoidance memory isn't like reality, it's a picture redrawn by emotion and distance. When closed, they see it as a burden, convincing themselves that independence is everything, that emotions only bring trouble instead of joy. Something magical happens when you leave. With time and distance, the avoidant begins to repaint the past in their mind. At first, this shift isn't clear. They don't instantly crave you, but the way they remember the relationship slowly changes. The small conflicts, the uncomfortable moments that were once magnified, now quietly fade. Instead, a new feeling creeps in. They begin to miss the warm, gentle moments. Avoidants are not emotionless stones. They have feelings, but often hide them when things get too close. When you were still there, intimacy overwhelmed them, and all they saw was the heaviness. But now, without that pressure, they begin to look back and see the comfort, the peace you once brought, the very thing they once pushed away. This process isn't intentional. They don't deliberately distort memories, but the mind naturally does it, romanticizing the past over time. The danger is that they not only idealize the past but also believe in a version that isn't real. They tell themselves they were wrong to leave, that they acted too quickly, that what they had was more beautiful than they thought. But they rarely ask, is this an awakening or just another form of avoidance? When they lose control, they don't think, I need to change, but I've lost something valuable. That thought fuels the obsession. They come back after a long silence, not because they've matured, but because their memory of you has changed. They crave the sense of safety you once gave, but don't want to face the pain that comes with it. In the end, they're not addicted to you, but to the idealized image of you in their mind. But here's the trouble. When the avoidant returns and faces the reality of closeness, things are often not as they imagined. At first, they romanticize you, but when real emotions come flooding in, the old fears resurface. Intimacy, once a dream, now feels like a trap. If they've never truly changed, never faced the reasons they left, they'll run again just like before. So you need to ask yourself, why are they back? Because they've overcome their fears, or because they're enchanted by a beautiful image in their head? If the avoidant pattern still exists, the cycle won't stop. The only difference is how exhausted you'll become before realizing the truth. They don't love your present self, but a painted past that may never have existed. Humans always seek validation. It's instinctive. It's how we feel our worth. For the avoidant, this is deeply conflicted. They crave attention, but fear having to reciprocate. They want to be desired, but shy away from the responsibility of being understood. This inner struggle is what makes them obsessed with you after no contact. When you were there, even in a tense relationship, they felt secure knowing you cared. Your presence was a silent anchor, affirming their significance. But when you disappear, that anchor breaks. They no longer know if you're still waiting. That silent comfort vanishes, and their mind falls into chaos, pulling them into an emotional storm they can't control. On the surface, avoidants may seem confident and cold, but inside they are more vulnerable than you think. They have built an entire world where they convince themselves they don't need anyone, that loneliness is strength, that attachment only makes them weak. But when someone once within reach suddenly disappear, that wall begins to shake. At first, they may pretend everything is fine, even feel proud for having escaped you. But then, as the silence stretches on, they start to feel confused. With no one validating them, they begin to wonder, why haven't they reached out? Have they truly forgotten me? Though they always deny it, deep down they still need to feel that they matter in someone's eyes. When you stop responding, they're forced to face a frightening thought. Maybe they're the one who's been left behind. That's why no contact makes them crave you. Your silence forces them to reassess their place in your life. The less they hear from you, the more they long for attention. Before, you were familiar, always there. Now you've become a mystery, elusive, an allure they can't resist. But don't be mistaken, this isn't necessarily love. It's a battle of the ego. They can't stand the feeling that you left first. They come back not because they've changed, but to soothe their insecurity, to test if you still care. Once they feel reassured, the old cycle might repeat. The problem isn't you, but the fear of intimacy they've never faced, the fragile ego they strive to protect. If that doesn't change, their return is just a way to escape pain, not a genuine step forward. The core issue isn't whether they come back or not, but whether you want to keep being the one who soothes their ego, only for them to quietly walk away again once they feel secure. A real relationship isn't built on the fear of losing each other, but on the courage to connect, to grow together, to face the dark corners of closeness. If they can't do that, then their return isn't love. It's just a way to run from their own insecurity. On the outside, avoidance may seem strong, as if nothing can shake them. You might think they're not heartbroken after the breakup, that their quick ability to let go proves they never really cared. That's what they want you to believe, and it's also how they deceive themselves. They've spent their whole lives practicing how to lock away emotions, to bury every attachment so deep that even they forget what they once felt. But don't be fooled. Avoidance doesn't mean heartless. It means not daring to face the heart. They build that protective shell not out of indifference, but to avoid pain. But humans can't lie to their hearts forever. Emotions don't vanish, they hide, waiting to resurface. When you cut contact, they don't realize it right away. At first, they're confident that leaving was right, that distance will bring relief. And maybe, for a moment, they're right. They feel free, everything under control. But that isn't healing, it's delay. As silence stretches on, what they repressed starts to seep through. They become obsessed with you not because they've awakened, but because the feelings they suppressed have finally found a way out. Distance doesn't heal them. It only clarifies what they've been denying. When you're no longer there, something curious begins to happen. Without the pressure of the relationship, their mind quietly starts to look back. Small memories, a familiar melody, an old street corner, a private joke only the two of you understood, suddenly come rushing in. At first, they brush it off, thinking it's just harmless nostalgia. But day by day, things begin to change. The feelings they once buried start to rise, not loudly, but quietly. They creep into dreams, disturb their sleep, make them restless without knowing why. They feel your absence, but they don't dare name it, because to do so would mean admitting they were wrong, and for avoidance, admitting a mistake is scarier than opening up. Then the spiral begins. They dig through old photos, secretly check your social media, wondering if you still remember them. But it's not just about remembering, it's about what your absence triggers. They realize they no longer hold the upper hand. You, the person they once thought would always be there, now feels so far away. For them, losing control over how you see them is a major shock. They're used to being in charge, but when you go no contact, you push them into an emotional chaos they've always avoided. They panic, facing the haunting question, what if I was wrong? What if I lost something precious? For the avoidant, that question feels like an unbearable wound. It's not just missing you. It's the fear that they destroyed something that could have saved them. When the emotions become too uncomfortable, the avoidant doesn't sit still. They act, texting, calling, trying to pull you back. But don't celebrate just yet. This isn't necessarily because they're ready to change. Often they simply can't bear the thought of being forgotten. They want to test if you still care, to regain the sense of control. So the real question isn't, will they come back? But have they faced themselves yet? If they haven't moved past the original fear, the one that made them leave, then their return isn't love. It's a way to soothe insecurity, fill the emptiness, or reclaim power. That's not the foundation of a lasting relationship, but the start of an endless cycle until you or they decide to break it. The most ironic part of the avoidance mind lies in a contradiction they rarely notice. Deep down, they're obsessed with the fear of dependence. Over the years, they've told themselves that closeness is risky, that it brings burden, suffocation, and ultimately pain. So they build barriers, keeping others at just the right distance to feel safe. They worship freedom, independence, and the ability to control their own life. But that very fear unintentionally makes them slaves to avoidance, never truly breaking free. They think they're protecting themselves, but in reality, they're just running from what could make them feel whole. The funny thing is, in trying to avoid dependence on others, the avoidant falls into another trap. They become dependent on distance itself. They don't actually escape attachment, they just replace it with a new kind of bond, one built on fear rather than warmth. That's why, when you go no contact, they're deeply shaken. You don't just leave, you take with you their lifeline. The thing that let them keep their distance while still feeling safe, that you weren't going anywhere. Your silence shatters everything they relied on. When they were with you, they held the power. Whether cold or indifferent, they knew you were still there, waiting. That fed the belief that they were free, that they could leave at any time without losing anything. But when you truly disappear, they lose control. At first, they tell themselves they're fine, that this is what they wanted, that life without you is more comfortable. But then, time reveals the truth. The initial relief fades, giving way to creeping insecurity. In the quiet moments, when there's nothing to distract them, they start to wonder, am I really as strong as I think? That thought terrifies them. If they were attached to you, even just a little, then the entire world they built with its fortified walls and belief that they need no one might just be an illusion. You're not just someone they lost, but living proof that they're not as untouchable as they believed. And that shakes everything to its core. Panic sets in, but not because they suddenly realize how deeply they care about you. No, it comes from having to face a dark corner inside, a place they've always avoided. They obsess over you not because they've matured or are ready for a real relationship, but because they're lost in an inner storm. They want to reach out, to pull you back, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear that you've moved on. Fear that they're not the stone they thought they were. Fear that for the first time, they are the one who's been left behind. So you need to ask yourself, did they come back for you or for themselves? Have they truly changed? Dared to face the fears that once made them leave, or are they merely trying to soothe their insecurity? If they act out of fear of losing control, out of needing the validation you once gave, then everything remains the same. The push-pull cycle will continue, repeating endlessly until someone says, enough. The decision is in your hands, to keep dancing to their tune or to stop. Because true love does not live on fear of loss. It requires presence, commitment, and the courage to stay, no matter how frightening the pain may be. If they cannot do that, their return is not a beacon of hope. It is merely a sign of the wounds in their heart that have not healed. You are not a temporary remedy for them to forget the pain. You deserve someone who dares to move past their fears, not someone who constantly runs from them. In the end, the journey of the avoidant is a story of the conflict between the longing for connection and the fear of getting hurt. They may come back after a pause, but that does not always mean change. It is usually just their way of coping with insecurity and loss. A true relationship cannot live on fear. It requires the courage to be present and to overcome. You deserve that, not just to fill someone else's void. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Your support is a great motivation for us. If you find the content interesting, please subscribe to the channel so as not to miss our future shares. Do not hesitate to leave a comment, share your thoughts or experiences on this topic. We look forward to hearing from you.